Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're going way back, like billions of years, to explore the world of LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. And we've got some seriously cool research papers to help us with this, and I can't wait to just dive right in with our expert.
It's funny, when we talk about Lucia, we're not talking about like some dusty old fossil. We're talking about trying to understand an actual living organism that was alive, what, over 4 billion years ago?
Like paleontology, but like for the tiniest organisms imaginable. So I'm already hooked. How do scientists even begin to figure out when something as ancient as LUCA was even alive?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. Imagine trying to date a historical event, but without any written records, right? That's kind of what it's like trying to date Lucia. But scientists have come up with some ingenious methods. One of the coolest techniques they use is called cross-bracing. And basically what that involves is looking at genes that duplicated before Lucia existed.
So instead of just relying on fossils, these duplications kind of act like a second set of timestamps.
Exactly. It's like having two clocks to double-check the time. And by comparing these timestamps to fossil records and other data, researchers have estimated that Luciae likely lived around 4.2 billion years ago.
Wow, that's so early in Earth history.
Yeah, incredibly early.
It makes you wonder if, life on Earth could be even older than we thought.
It definitely raises that possibility. In fact, this research actually kind of throws a wrench into that traditional view of the late heavy bombardment. That period of like intense asteroid impacts, thought to have maybe wiped out early life. The findings actually suggest that that bombardment may not have been as intense or even as widespread as we once thought.
So we have like a rough idea of when Lucy existed, but what was it like? Was it just like a simple blog, or was it something a little bit more complex?
That's the million-dollar question, right? So to try and figure this out, scientists used modern prokaryotes, think bacteria. And they built a model that basically predicts genome size based on certain gene families.
It's kind of like trying to figure out like the original recipe of a dish based on, the variations that exist today.
Exactly. And get this, their model suggests that Lucia probably had a genome of around 2.75 million base pairs, and that encoded over 2,600 proteins.
Wait, hold on. Isn't that like comparable in size to modern prokaryotes?
It is.
So Lucia wasn't just some like primordial soup ingredient. It was actually pretty complex.
It was. It was a complex, thriving organism, and it was a lot going on inside. And this really tells us that Lucy was more than just like a stepping stone. It was actually, a remarkable kind of feat of evolution.
Okay, so Lucia had a decent-sized genome, and it was, alive and well 4.2 billion years ago. But how did it actually survive? I mean, what did it eat? How did it get energy?
Ah, yes. The mystery of Lucy's metabolism. So research actually suggests that Lucio may have used something called the Wood-Youngdahl pathway. It's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's a way of getting energy from chemical reactions, not sunlight.
So instead of being like a plant that uses photosynthesis, it was more like maybe a deep-sea creature that like thrives on the chemicals spewing out of those hydrothermal vents.
You got it. It's a process called chemosynthesis, and it's incredibly important in these environments where there's no sunlight. And here's the really cool part. The Wood-Youngdahl pathway is super flexible, right? So Lucier could actually use different energy sources. So, things like alcohols or sugars if they were around.
So Lucy was adaptable, resourceful, making the most of what it had.
Definitely.
I'm getting the picture of like a pretty tough, resilient organism.
Tough and resourceful, and get this, not alone.
Wait, what do you mean not alone? Was it like living in a community with other organisms?
Exactly. Remember all those byproducts that Lucio was creating as it was going about its business? Well, those byproducts actually created opportunities for other microbes. It's kind of like, composting. One organism's waste is another one's treasure.
So even back then, life was already forming these like complex communities, relying on each other for survival.
Yeah, this is what I'll call syntrophy, where organisms kind of rely on each other's waste products. It's a beautiful example of this early cooperation in the history of life.
This is incredible. So we've got Luciae, a complex organism, adaptable, using chemosynthesis, living in a community with other microbes. But where did all this ancient microbial action take place? Was it in the ocean depths, like a primordial hot spring?
So that's a very hot debate, among scientists. And the evidence is kind of a mixed bag. On one hand, Lucier has this gene for something called reverse diarase. And that's often found in organisms that love extreme heat, like the ones you find around those deep sea vents.
Okay, so a deep sea vent neighborhood is a possibility, but you said mixed bag. So What else is there?
Well, there's also this gene for spore photoproduct lyas, and that was found in Lucier's genome too. And that suggests that Lucier might have been exposed to UV radiation. So that means it could have lived closer to the surface, where sunlight could reach.
Intriguing. So maybe Lucier was like a bit of an adventurer, going between the depths and the surface, exploring.
That's a very fascinating possibility. Maybe Lucier was just kind of testing the waters, so to speak.
This is really blowing my mind. Okay, so we've covered so much ground already, but before we get too carried away with UCA's potential travel itinerary, let's zoom out for a sec. How did Lucier and all of its, microbial neighbors fit into the bigger picture of the early Earth? We're talking about a planet that was very much still in its, formative stages.
That's a great question. Scientists are still working on, all the details. But here's what we can kind of glean from the research. It seems that a chemoautotrophic UCA, using the Wood-Yumdahl pathway, could have been a key part of this global hydrogen recycling system.
A global hydrogen recycling system. That sounds intense. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Imagine it like this. Lucier, being a chemoautotroph, produced organic matter, right? And then other microbes, like things called methanogens, could then use that organic matter. And then in the process, they would release methane.
Okay. Lucier makes food, methanogens eat it, methane is released. What happens next?
Here's where it gets really cool. That methane, it gets broken down by what's called photochemistry in the atmosphere, and that creates more hydrogen. And guess what? That hydrogen fuels UCA's metabolism. It's like a beautiful cycle, this self-sustaining ecosystem on this global scale.
Wow. It's like a perfectly choreographed dance between, the atmosphere, the oceans, and all these ancient microbes, with UCA, kind of playing the lead role. But there's one thing that's been kind of bugging me. Nitrogen. All life needs nitrogen to build those essential molecules like proteins and DNA. So where did LUCA get its nitrogen fix?
Yeah, that's a very crucial question. Now, you might think that LUCA could have just, pulled nitrogen from the atmosphere. But it's not that simple. The type of nitrogen in the early atmosphere, it wasn't easily accessible to organisms. Even lightning, which can convert atmospheric nitrogen into that usable form, even that may not have been enough to really support a global ecosystem.
So if LUCA couldn't get nitrogen from the atmosphere or from lightning, where did it come from? That's kind of a head-scratcher.
Well, researchers have a very fascinating theory, HCN, or hydrogen cyanide. They think that HCN, which was produced in the atmosphere, rained down into the oceans. And that provided, all this nitrogen for Lucier and its neighbors.
HCN rain. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but I have to admit it's a pretty elegant solution.
Right. It really fits with what we know about the chemistry of that early Earth.
This is incredible. We've learned so much about Lucia already. I mean, its age, its complex genome, its adaptable metabolism, its community, its potential habitats, and even its role in a global hydrogen recycling system. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Lucier. We've already uncovered so much about this ancient ancestor, from its surprisingly complex genome to its potential role in that global hydrogen recycling system. But there's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely. We've only just begun to kind of scratch the surface. Remember all those genes we talked about, the ones that trace back to Lucier? Those hold a treasure trove of information about its cellular machinery, like the inner workings of this ancient organism.
It's like we're piecing together an ancient instruction manual.
Yeah.
So what secrets have those genes revealed so far?
Well, for starters, remember ATP synthase.
Yeah, you said Lucier had that.
It did, and not just any version. It had both the archaeal and bacterial versions of ATP synthase, so that suggests that, efficient energy production was already a key feature, even back then.
So Lucier was like a powerhouse, even way back then. What else have we learned about its inner workings?
Well, there's this gene called mReb, and that's responsible for giving many bacteria their rod-like shape. And its presence in Lucier suggests that it, too, may have been a tiny rod.
I love that. I'm just picturing like a microscopic submarine cruising around the primordial oceans.
It's a great analogy, and it gets even more interesting when we look at the genes involved in building cell membranes. Our research suggests that Lucier likely had the machinery to make both ether and ester lipids.
Okay, back up for a second. Lipids are fats, right? What do they have to do with cell membranes?
Okay, so think of cell membranes like the walls of a house, right? They protect the cell, they keep everything inside. Now, different organisms use different types of building materials for their walls. So archaea often use ether lipids, while bacteria tend to use ester lipids.
So Lucier had the ability to make both types.
Yes.
That's pretty versatile. It's like having a universal toolkit for building cell membranes.
Exactly. And this versatility, it suggests that Luciem might have been able to adapt to a much wider range of environments than we, previously thought.
This is really blowing my mind. So Lucia wasn't just some simple blob. It was a complex, sophisticated cell with, a talent for energy production, a potential rod-like shape, and this adaptable membrane building system. What else can we learn from these ancient genes?
Well, this is where things get a little spooky. Remember those CRISPR-Cas systems we talked about
Yeah,
earlier?
yeah, like the microscopic defense force.
Right. They act like a cellular immune system defending cells from invading viruses.
Did Luca have one of those?
So we found evidence of an early CRISPR-Cas system in LUCA's genome.
Wow.
Specifically, we found genes for several Cas proteins, but not the complete system that we see today. It's like finding, an ancient shield and sword,
Right.
giving us this glimpse into the early evolution of cellular defenses.
So Luca had this, primitive immune system?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense considering viruses have been around for a long time, too. It's like an ancient arms race playing out at this microscopic level.
Exactly. And this really just adds another layer to Luca's complexity. Even at that early stage, life was already engaged in this constant struggle for survival, evolving these ways to protect itself from attack. But with all this complexity, it kind of begs the question, where did Luca come from? What came before it?
Right. Luca, by definition, is the last universal common ancestor. So it had to come from something. What can we say about, the period before Luca, that mysterious era, when life first emerged?
That's the million-dollar question. While we don't really have definitive answers yet, there are some pretty intriguing clues. We know that the early Earth was a very, very different place than it is today.
Oh, yeah.
The atmosphere, the oceans, the conditions, much harsher. But amidst all that chaos, the building blocks of life, they were forming.
You're talking about those famous experiments, right? Like the ones that showed how amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, could be created from simple molecules in the early Earth's atmosphere.
Exactly, and we've even found evidence of organic molecules, including amino acids and nucleotides. Those are the building blocks of DNA and RNA in meteorites that have landed on Earth.
So the ingredients for life were literally raining down from space.
It is pretty wild, and these organic molecules, they can self-assemble into more complex structures, right? Like chains of amino acids, or even simple RNA molecules.
Wait, RNA, isn't that like DNA's cousin?
Yes. And some scientists actually believe that RNA may have played this crucial role in the origin of life. You see, RNA can act as both a carrier of genetic information, just like DNA, but it can also act as an enzyme catalyzing these chemical reactions.
So RNA could have been like a one-stop shop for early life, both storing the genetic information and doing the work of building and maintaining the cells.
That's the idea. It's called the RNA world hypothesis, and it's a very fascinating area of research.
Okay, so we've got the building blocks, we've got RNA, and we've got this crazy, chaotic early Earth. But how do we go from those ingredients to a complex, organized cell like LUCA? That just seems like this huge leap.
It is, and there are many theories about how that might have happened. One idea is that life kind of emerged in steps, right? So you start with these simple, self-replicating molecules, and then they evolve into these more complex structures, like protocells. And eventually, that leads to the emergence of true cells.
Protocells, what are those?
Imagine, tiny membrane-bound compartments, like soap bubbles, but they're filled with the building blocks of life. And these protocells, they could enclose and protect molecules, and that allows for even more complex chemical reactions to take place.
So protocells were like the precursors to true cells, like little miniature laboratories where life could just experiment and evolve.
Exactly. And as those protocells became more and more complex and more organized, they might have eventually developed the characteristics that we associate with life. Things like metabolism, replication, and evolution. It's a remarkable story of this kind of incremental progress where each step builds upon the last.
Welcome back, deep divers. We've journeyed billions of years back in time to explore the world of Lucia, and I have to say, I am still reeling from all the incredible insights we've uncovered.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've pieced together Lucia's genome, we've explored its metabolism, and we even envisioned its potential role in, shaping that early Earth.
Oh, and who could forget that mind-blowing global hydrogen recycling system? Talk about a complex web of life. But you know what's really got me thinking? It's the implications of Lucia's story for how we understand life itself. If everything alive today can be traced back to this one ancestor, What does that tell us about the fundamental nature of life?
That's a question that has kept scientists and philosophers busy for centuries. And I think what Lucy's existence shows us is just this incredible unity of life. Think about it. We have, towering redwoods, we have microscopic bacteria, and everything in between. Yet we all share a common ancestor. We share this common set of instructions written in that language of DNA.
So it's like we're all part of this one enormous family with Lucier as our ancient patriarch.
Exactly. And that realization has some pretty profound implications, right? It means that the basic principles of biology, the rules that govern life, are likely universal, applicable to all life forms, no matter how different they may seem.
So the same rules that apply to a single-cell bacterium also apply to a giant blue whale.
It's incredible, right?
That's incredible. It's like we found this hidden code that unlocks the secrets of life itself.
And that's why studying Lucier is so crucial. By understanding this, ancient ancestor, we can actually gain insights into this fundamental principles that govern, all of life, from its origins to its evolution.
It's like having a blueprint for life, like a guidebook that tells us how life works at its most basic level. But as we've seen, that blueprint is surprisingly complex. Lucia wasn't just this simple, primitive organism.
No, Lucier was already the sophisticated cell. It had this advanced energy production, a potential rod-like shape, and this, versatile membrane building system. And let's not forget that early immune system always ready to fend off attacks.
It was a survivor. And all of that complexity, it tells us something pretty remarkable about evolution, too. It suggests that the early stages of life were a time of just rapid innovation, like a period where life was just experimenting with all these different forms and functions, trying out new possibilities in a dynamic, unpredictable environment.
Like a laboratory of life where, all these different combinations were being tested, which led to this incredible diversity that we see today.
I love that. And Lucy was the winning experiment, the prototype that led to the success of life as we know it. But it also makes you wonder about the other experiments, right? The lineages that may have existed alongside Lucy, but just didn't make it. What if there were other, equally successful forms of life that just simply didn't leave any descendants?
It's a fascinating question and one that's, incredibly difficult to answer. It's like trying to reconstruct a lost civilization from just, a few scattered artifacts. But who knows? Maybe one day we'll find evidence of these lost lineages hidden away in some, ancient rock formation or maybe even on another planet.
Now that would be a discovery. Speaking of other planets, how does Lucy's story inform, our foods for life beyond Earth?
Well, I think Lucy's complexity tells us that life, at least as we know it, it's not just some simple accident. It's the result of a long and intricate evolutionary process that was shaped by the very specific conditions of our planet.
So we shouldn't expect to just find exact replicas of Earth life if we're looking for life on other planets.
Exactly. I think we need to broaden our perspective and consider the possibility of life forms that might be radically different from anything we've ever seen before.
So instead of looking for, little green men, we should be open to the idea of, say, silicon-based life forms or organisms that thrive in environments that would be, deadly to us.
Precisely. I think Lucy's story teaches us that life is adaptable, it's resilient, and it's capable of thriving in conditions that we might consider extreme. And that really opens up, a whole universe of possibilities for the kinds of life that might be out there.
It's both exciting and humbling to think that we're part of this vast interconnected web of life that stretches back, billions of years and might extend far beyond our planet.
It really is. And I think that realization should inspire us to, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep pushing the boundaries of our understanding. We've only just begun to kind of unravel the mysteries of life's origins and its incredible journey through time and space.
Well, this deep dive has been a truly mind-expanding experience. Thank you so much for being our guide on this incredible journey.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, remember, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop being curious about the world around us. Who knows what incredible discoveries await us just around the corner? Until next time, keep diving deep.